Together we will read Acts of Parliament leading to the Declaration of Independence. Please make sure you have your materials. You may pause and rewind as you see fit. During the time period spanning from the 1500s to the early 1800s, strong European countries such as Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, France, and Great Britain fought one another to become the strongest country in the world. However, this fight was not a fight in the traditional sense. All throughout the world, vast areas of land were being taken over and claimed by these various countries as the race to gain the most land and territory was how these countries measured themselves against one another. The more land that a country took control of, the more resources, gold, silver, or cash crops it would have, in turn making them more richer, meaning more powerful. This was the age of exploration. By the 1700s, North America was claimed by Spain, France, and Great Britain. Spain owned the land west of the Mississippi River. France owned the land between Mississippi River and Appalachian Mountains, while Great Britain owned the land east of the Appalachian Mountains. As the population of the British colonies started to grow and people looked for more room to grow and expand, this made the British colonists look west of the Appalachians onto French-claimed land. The British and French, who were already engaged in war over in Europe, fought over the right to settle on the land that France owned. The French did not heavily populate much of the land west of the Appalachians, but did use of the land for trading furs and animal skins that were in high demand over in Europe. The British thought that this was a waste of the land and believed using the land for farming was a much better use of the land. This will be a reoccurring theme throughout the school year, whether talking about the British or the American government. By the 1740s, British settlers were pushing into the Ohio River Valley lands claimed by the French. By 1756, the pressure soon led to the French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War. With the help of George Washington and the Virginia militia, Great Britain won the war and in the terms of the Treaty of Paris of 1763 took control of all the land east of the Mississippi. Even though a victory of the French would seem to provide help for the British colonists, it actually sparked one of the first causes of the American Revolution. 1. Who owned the land between the Mississippi River and Appalachian Mountains? 2. Why did the British colonists look to expand? 3. What was the name of the war between the British and French from 1756 to 1763? The Treaty of Paris of 1763, which marked the end of the French and Indian War, granted Britain a great deal of valuable North American land. But the new land also gave rise to a plethora, meaning a lot of problems. The new British territory, known as the Ohio Valley, was marked by the Appalachian Mountains in the east and the Mississippi River in the west. Despite the acquisition of this large band of land, the British tried to discourage American colonists from settling in it. The British already had difficulty administering the settled areas east of the Appalachians. Americans moving west would stretch British administrative resources thin. Additionally, the Native Americans who had allied themselves with the French during the French and Indian War continued to fight after the peace had been reached. The last thing the British government wanted were hordes of crowds of American colonists crossing the Appalachians, fueling French and Native American resentment. The solution seemed simple. The Proclamation of 1763 was issued, which banned colonial expansion west of the Appalachian Mountains, theoretically protecting colonists from Indian rampages. The measure was also intended to shield Native Americans from increasingly frequent attacks by white settlers. 4. What was the Proclamation of 1763, and what was the purpose of trying to limit the movement of the people in the colonies? 5. How would you feel about the Proclamation of 1763 if you, a people that you loved, sacrificed their lives during the French and Indian War? And why would you feel that way? The Navigation Acts were passed by the British government in the mid-1600s as a way to keep the colonists from trading with any other country except for with Britain. Early on, the Navigation Acts did not bother the colonists as they felt grateful to the British government for allowing them the opportunity to come over and to start a new life. But as years and generations went by, the gratitude towards the British government started to fade away as many of the colonists had no real relationship with England and would rather figure out how to make the most money they could for the goods that they produced. The Navigation Acts were enforced and followed reluctantly. But as the prices of cash crops like tobacco dropped, it made colonists more aware of the control the British government had over them and the amount of money was taken from them. Eventually, the British Parliament needed a more profitable way to pay off war debts from the French and Indian War that they had piled up during the wars with France. Taxing seemed like the most logical step in making these payments. Parliament started with the Sugar Act, which was an indirect tax, paid by the seller or the buyer to one of the other parties, where merchants who sold materials like sugar and molasses were taxed for selling the items, and then the price of the item would go up where the buyers purchased them. The tax on sugar was fine, but Parliament needed to find items that were more commonly used, making it hard for the colonists to avoid paying the taxes. So in 1765, the Stamp Act was passed. The Stamp Act was the first direct tax, a tax paid directly to the government, i.e. income tax on the colonist on various papers goods, such as legal documents. Arguing that only their own representative assemblies could tax them, the colonists insisted that the act was unconstitutional, and they resorted to mob violence to intimidate stamp collectors into resigning. Parliament repealed the Stamp Act in 1766. 6. What items did the Stamp Act tax? 7. How is a direct tax different than an indirect tax? 8. Do you think it makes a difference to people whether something is taxed directly or indirectly? The effects of the Stamp Act were felt all throughout the colonies, but nowhere were the protesters more active than in Boston, in the Massachusetts colony. Some of the strongest revolutionary leaders, such as Paul Revere, John Hancock, and John Adams, lived in Boston, but the strongest opponent of the Stamp Act was Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams knew that in order to make a serious statement to the British Crown, the colonists needed to organize different ways of protesting the taxes that were being put on the colonies. One of the reasons that the colonists were so upset about the taxes that Parliament was putting on them was that there was no one over in Britain representing the colonists to say how they felt about the different taxes and actions that Parliament was putting on them. This is also referred to as James Otter's slogan, taxation without representation. Once the Stamp Act was repealed, many of the colonists felt as if the British government was listening to them and that they had made the point, but that wasn't the case. The Stamp Act was repealed, but not because the colonists were upset and protesting. The merchants over in Britain were losing money due to the boycotts placed on the taxed items, and it was the frustration and threats that led Parliament to get rid of the tax on paper. What the colonists had a hard time understanding was that proximity played a large part in what the members of Parliament did. Parliament, the lawmaking group in Britain, had its members voted in by the citizens of different areas in Great Britain, and in order from the members to keep the jobs they needed to keep the people in Britain happy. This was just another reason why the colonists wanted to have some form of representation over in England, trying to protect the rights and fight for the wants. A representative form of government is an electoral system where citizens vote to elect people to represent their interests and concerns. Those elected meet to debate and make laws on behalf of the whole community as society, instead of the people voting directly on laws and other debates. 9. How would having a representatives in Parliament give the colonists political power? After Parliament decided to repeal the Stamp Act, they decided just 1 year later to set a new tax on the colonists. The Townshend Act taxed goods like lead, paint, paper, tea, and glass. Colonists felt this act was unnecessary and saw it as a sneaky way to gain revenue. Coupled it with the Quartering Act that had been passed as a way to save money. As a result, rather than permanent housing for the soldiers, the colonies did not feel free in their own homes. Colonists thought that acts of kindness should not be an obligation. All of this tension between the British soldiers and colonists came to a climax in 1770 in the city of Boston. The anger and frustration again from the British merchants forced Parliament to once again repeal the tax that they had placed on the colonists. The Townshend Acts were no more, but Parliament did not totally give up on taxing the colonists. Parliament decided to keep the tax on tea and named the new tax the Tea Act. The Tea Act didn't truly tax the colonists on the tea that they used, but rather gave one company, British East India Company, the sole power to sell the tea in the colonies. This upset the colonists as they felt this time that they were being treated differently because they live in the colonies than the British citizens living in Great Britain. Not surprisingly, on December 16, 1773, at 7 p.m., as many as 116 people boarded 3 ships in the
overboard into the water. The British Parliament was furious about the actions of the citizens of Boston and demanded that repayment for the lost tea be made immediately. As a way to speed up the payment of the lost tea, Parliament issued the Coercive Acts, which the colonists referred to as the Intolerable Acts. The Intolerable Acts closed the port of Boston, abolished the upper house of Massachusetts legislature, and cut the power of the town meetings. 10. Why did Britain pass the Tea Act? 11. What other ways, besides the Boston Tea Party, might colonists have protested the Tea Act? And 12. What were the Intolerable Acts? I'm sorry the end of this got cut off, but I hope that you enjoyed and that this recording is helpful for you all. I'll see you in class and have a nice day.